Welcome to Chapter 7 of our class here, talking about personality and effect on exercise, how personality with development of exercise, so on and so forth. So with Chapter 7, it's an expansion from the intervention qualities that we talked about in Chapters 5 and 6, and now moving into the personality component of it. So progress through here. It's a relatively shorter chapter than the last in chapter 6, so it shouldn't be too long of a view. So let's dive right in with personality. All right, really, let's just talk about the definition and break it down. It's an underlying, relatively stable psychological structure and process that organizes human experience and shapes a person's actions and reactions to the environment. So, really, let's break it down. Underlying, not outward. Okay, it's what you see. It's how that person acts in certain manners, in certain ways. Okay, so one of those things where this is what we can do. All right, we don't see it outright. It's just what we do. It's our natural state. Underlying, relatively stable. Well, yeah, your personality. You kind of look at it from the standpoint that, personality really, for the most part, doesn't change much from early on stages of your life to as you grow older. Your personality sticks with you. I mean, that's why it's relatively stable, because there are points in time where there can be slight changes, but that comes with maturation. That comes with are you in specific job environments, relationships, like things like that. All right. Underlying, relatively stable psychological structures and processes. All right, structures, how things are made up of, what things are made up of, processes, how things are controlled and brought out. All right, that take your human experience, what you do in a day-to-day life, and shape your actions and reactions to the environment, and shape how you are in terms of what you're going to do for your surroundings and what your surroundings are going to do for you, and how you adjust to them. All right, that's what we're talking about there with personality. Everybody knows, it's like, oh, that person has a really great personality. Okay, well, yeah, we know that because look at the second statement: an individual's unique but consistent psychological makeup. That's the easier version of this. All right, an individual's unique but consistent psychological makeup. Yeah, that person's got a great personality. Well, yeah, we know that. We know that, and or that person, their personality kind of sucks a little bit. I mean, well, you can say that. Oh my gosh, can't use the word sucks. But it really is, and I can honestly say from my own experience, and I've had people vouch for me that have known me from the time I was younger to the time till now, and they're like, yeah, your personality really hasn't changed much from the time that you were a kid till now. That's not a dig. All right, we can't take that as a dig kind of a thing, because really what that means is you're you. Okay, you're you, and that's how you're taken with everything, and we need to look at it from that standpoint where you as a kid and you as now, it just means that you react and act in certain ways. It doesn't mean, and with maturity, those actions and reactions get better and more appropriate for your surroundings. That's what we're saying there. Okay. So when we talk about the structure of our personality, we have three components here. All right, you have your personality core, you have typical responses, and then it says the last one is your role-related behavior. Okay. Now, with those, and you look at everything from its own standpoint here, the personality core, it's really how you take, like it says here, early environmental interactions, and your perceptions of the external world, okay, perceptions of you, basic attitudes, values, interests, motives, and then self-concepts, and that really makes up who you are, okay? It's really those, and by, when you say you're, like when people say they're rotten to the core, well, that, the personality to that, the personality core to that, yeah, well, they're not a very good person. But really, it's those defining characteristics that you have within you that make up that personality that you have, okay? Typical responses for situations is you can in a certain situation you can sit there and you can pretty much predict how something is going to happen or what the outcome is going to be of a specific environment for that person. If you know a person is relative, if their personality is kind of skittish, well, then you know that, around fireworks, we know the typical response is they're going to be jumpy. Okay, so that's just one example. Um, a person who's a little bit more not intro, a little bit more extroverted. They're going to be the person that just say it's a college student. They're going to be the person that goes into the classroom and they can make small talk with anybody. I'm a true definition of an extrovert simply because I've had people say that, yeah, you're the type of person that can pass the grocery store test. And we always, my friends and I and my family, we all know what the grocery store test is because we make fun of my mother because of it, because she is actually, she is like me, where we can take and have a straight up conversation about anything with the person in either front of you or behind you in the checkout lane. So that's, typical response. If you're with me in a grocery store, you're probably going to get into a conversation with a random person if we're waiting in line. So usually when people go grocery shopping with me, they kind of like, fret a little bit because they're like, hopefully we're the only people in that lane, that checkout lane. So, but anyway, all joking aside, the other part of everything too, like it says here, is the role related behavior. Really we're talking about like daily behaviors. Daily behaviors that again, just like everything else we've kind of been talking about here, it's based on like a certain makeup, a certain context, certain environment that we look and find ourselves being in. Okay, so how do you act in certain roles or certain ways, and how do you behave in those manners? A child who has large amounts of outbursts with their parents with their role related behavior of their personality, they may do very well in school, which then we have to figure out what's going on there. Okay. You have a person who's very active in physical education class, but they don't feel like exercising on their own. Well, we have to figure out what's going on there. What are the role related issues that are going on in that moment? All right. A person who's very introverted is probably most likely not going to be in a classroom in a college and stir up a conversation to kind of spark interest for people. So you can see where we're going with that. Okay. But you can see here, on this graphic here, and I'm going to blow it up over there we go. So now we can kind of see it a little bit bigger, and I'm just going to drop out the text just for now, all the way. All right. And if we look, I know it kind of got moved a little bit because of the way that we stretched it, but let's talk about it. All right. You have your personality core to your typical responses to your role-related behaviors. We move from an internal personality core. Remember, that's what the core of what you're made up of. And we move from an internal to an external. So as we go from personality core to typical responses to role-related behaviors, we go from more of the internal of you being you and how you know you're made up of, to more of an external, which is more of in the situation. Okay? And then we move on the right-hand side over here with this box. We go from, I know it's supposed to be down a little bit more, but it's supposed to be probably down more toward the personality core, like internal and external are. But you move from a constant state of being to a dynamic state of being. As you go from your personality core, we said it's very constant. Okay, it's very, your personality core is very much the same. All right, but as you go and move toward the more dynamic, which is like a evolving or ever changing kind of a way, you adapt to new situations, role related behaviors. So you can see how you move through that process as well. Okay. So when we talk about studying personality, we have to learn about different things like the learning part of everything or the situational part of everything. And then we have to go from what we call dispositional or trait-based ways. So learning and situational kinds of things are more focused on the environment itself, okay, or the situation at hand, and it's right in that situational component. Whereas dispositional or trait-based approaches are more focused on, like it says, the individual. Okay, so we need to understand that. What are we, when we look at the study of it? What are we looking at? Are we looking at the environment that's shaping you, or are we looking at the individual themselves? Okay, and so what you end up with is what we call an interactionist perspective. Okay, and what we're saying here is that these approaches make up what we consider basically a study of personality, and that's really that's what interactionist perspective is kind of all about. Is that we're studying personality so we can figure out how to react in certain situations, how to make, why these people might be behaving in certain ways. We're determining behavior, okay, and that's really really important. So let's, we'll move on a little bit further with that, okay, a little bit later on when we talk more about what like a trait is and things like that. All right. So with biological theories, well, biological theories meaning that, biological processes about the body, that's what we're talking about. Okay. So the ancient Greeks thought about everything in terms of what we call bodily humor. Okay. Now, um, with everything here, we have that was what the ancient Greeks thought, and that moved us to what we say here is constitutional theory, where now we have what we call somatotypes, and the somatotypes in simplistic version. All right, when we look at us from a simplistic version, we know that we have three body types. All right, and that's really what we want to pay attention to. We have the ecto, endo, and mesomorph. Okay, the ectomorph being more of that lean, the prominent lean person. Okay, they're more, they consider these people, like linear, so like more straight lined. They're probably a little bit more tall. When you look at this person, if we're going to look in the land of sport, we're going to say this person has the runner's body. Okay, but with their characteristics, look at their characteristics of this person who is a potential ectomorph. What we're saying here is that the reactionary parts of it, their personality types, they're more tense, they're more introverted, they're more socially restrained, and they're more inhibited, meaning they keep more to themselves. Okay, an endomorph, we look at them and we say plumpness, fatness, roundness, softness. All right, all those are part of that. And with that, what we link them to is what the personality type is what we would call viscerotonia. Okay. And with that, what we're saying is they're more affectionate, they're more sociable, they're more relaxed, they're more jovial. All right. And when I say relaxed, it's interesting because these are sometimes, you ever heard like, and this isn't a dig on anybody or any person in particular, but you ever heard like a big person say, I'm okay with my body? Well, that's kind of what we're looking at there. So, but again, affectionate, just that's a natural personality characteristic. Sociable, all right, and then jovial, all right. And then lastly, with your mesomorph, that's usually your athletic body, all right, the more commonplace person that you think of when you think of athlete or someone who looks good, in terms of that perspective. The inverted triangle, if you think about it, they're wide in the shoulders and then they get narrower as they get toward their waistline. All right. And so with them, they're more adventurous, they're more risk taking, they're more dominant, aggressive, and commanding. All right. And that's where, they're, like I said, with the risk taking, they're willing to do things a little bit more because they're comfortable with themselves. Okay. So that's your biological theories. And then moving forward, we're going to talk about trait theories. With trait theories, all right, we really want to pay attention to, you know, what specific traits of a person. Okay, um, traits are basically what you're made up of. Okay, it's more about how when you look at everything, what are specific traits like being moody or anxious or restless or rigid versus more general, which is more like being neurotic or with neuroticism. All right. And that's really more about internal attributes that you're made up of. All right. Um, because really it's more about who you are underlying. All right. In terms of a both body and mind sort of construct about how you're made up in that manner. Okay. There are three different theories that we roll with here, and they are, like it says down here, Eysenck's personality theory, Cattell's personality theory, and then there's what we call the 5-factor model. All right. So, in terms of Eysenck, what we're saying here is that he kind of goes into what we call the retinacular formation of the brain. All right. And interesting, not Brian, but brain. Okay. And so, he is really big on this whole aspect of extroversion, introversion. Are you an extrovert or an introvert? Okay. And that's, basically mediated by what we call the reticular. I can't talk today. It's basically, working around the reticular formation or the neural tissues in your brainstem, because your brainstem receives all of this information. It receives, in some way, you can almost think of like an overload of stimulation that comes in, and then it causes you to either act in a certain manner of arousal or non-arousal. So if you know what being an extrovert is versus an introvert, you know that an extrovert is going to be more aroused, meaning they're going to be more likely to react to something, or an introvert is going to be less aroused and they're going to be less likely to, react to something. And that's what it comes down to. Okay. When we look at it again, there's that extroversion component, there's that introversion component, and then he goes into a couple different other parts of everything where we talk about neuroticism versus stability. All right. And basically what we're talking about here is the limbic system. Okay. And which is, the limbic system, we refer to that as, that's like the emotional center or the emotional brain. And that's connected directly to your ANS or your autonomic nervous system. And if I know for some of you, you haven't gotten into the exercise physiology part of everything yet, but when we talk about the autonomic nervous system, what we're talking about there is your body's natural reactions, all right, how the nervous system naturally makes things work. So what we're talking about there, things like heart rate, breathing rate, how your organs function, all of those are all part of the autonomic nervous system. And the ANS, or the autonomic nervous system, which we're talking about, ANS, that's part of what we call the fight or flight response. All right. So we know that with, neuroticism and stability, we know that if we're stable, our autonomic nervous system is less likely to, in a stability kind of a form, we're less likely to overreact or react at a higher level. Whereas with neuroticism, we're more likely to react in a greater sense. Okay. So, are we emotionally stable, or are we readily changeable? And that's really what it comes down to. Neuroticism being readily changeable, whereas, stability is more about being emotionally stable. And you can see how, again, the brain, with fight or flight response, if you're readily changeable, you're in that, you're stressed, meaning good or bad, whatever stress kind of you have. Okay. So, and then lastly, you have what we'd call your psychoticism and superego. Okay. And this one here, when we talk about everything, with one end, you're talking about, a superego. With your superego, you're really thinking about empathy, being cooperative. You're thinking about being what we call altruistic. You're a person who might be a more of a conformist. All right. Where with psychoticism, you're ending up with being more impulsive. Impulsive. You might be hostile, egocentric, not super ego, egocentric, where it revolves around you. You might be more aggressive, you tough-minded. Right, all of those things relate to being, in that psychoticism kind of a way. And so because of that, where do you fall in that spectrum? And that's what we want to say here. So these are just dimensions of that. And this is how the brain basically stimulates itself to be able to react in certain ways. Okay. So again, looking back at everything, we talked about traits versus states. Well, with traits, again, these are ways that, they're dispositions that influence our behavior. Okay, dependent up, and like I said, in a variety of situations. Traits are those things that you're made up of, whereas states are, basically ways that, states are ways that we react to a situation. Okay, that sometimes you find yourself in. All right, so trait versus state. This is sometimes an argument that comes around, and when we talk about everything from that perspective. Okay. So we talked to, when we go back to here a little bit, I think that, where was it at? Just so we can kind of, Cattell, all right, their personality theory. That's the next thing that we're going to talk about here. And Cattell, they actually used 16 factors. He used his name is Raymond Cattell. He used 16 factors to kind of basically describe you as a person in terms of your traits, your personality traits. Okay. And what you look at, if you look on the left side here, although there's not all 16 there, there's a lot of primary factors that you'll find over here. All right, confidence, controlled and disciplined versus uncontrolled. I didn't say that part. Confidence or self-secure versus timid and apprehensive. So when we look at these types of things, we look at it from the standpoint of the second order factor, which is emotionality. Whereas if we come down to the primary factors down here, you're going to see things like warm and sociable versus aloof and stiff. And that's more about that whole process of being more extroverted versus introverted and how we react. Happy-go-lucky and enthusiastic versus sober and glum. Okay? Introvert versus extrovert versus introvert, And so what we're looking at there is how these people work off of these factors. And so then we start looking at it like, okay, well, behind these theories and how they relate to exercise, what we say here is that a person who is on a higher level of fitness, they tend to find themselves on a more continuous pattern where they're less anxious and less neurotic. Okay? Whereas on the other hand, if you have lower levels of anxiety and emotionalism, you're basically, like it says here, you're more favorable you have a more favorable response to physical training. So if you're anxious and emotional in some ways, what that means is that you're going to, the way that activity reacts in your system is not as enjoyable. Okay. So what that means, if we put all this together, is higher levels of fitness cause less anxiety and neuroticism. All right, and we know that with lower levels of anxiety and and emotion and having emotional responses, we're more likely to train better or have a better response to training. So what we're saying is high levels of fitness create a more favorable response to our training that we're doing. Well, yeah, I enjoy working out. I don't feel now a specific workout might be like, oh man, this looks really tough, and you might be like, I don't know how this is going to go. But you're still going to do it, and you're still going to put out you're still going to have motivation and put out the what do you want to call it, the oomph, or put out the the motivation plus the actual physical work that's going to be challenging. But you don't have that. You're like, oh, this looks miserable. But in the end, you're not like, oh, I don't want to do this. I'm really kind of scared. It's like, no, I'm going to do it. It's going to be challenging. Okay, and that's what we're referring to here on these sliding scales. Okay. And then lastly, if we go back to that list again, remember we talked about the two gentlemen, plus we had what we call the 5-factor model. And if we want to know about the 5-factor model of everything, all right, in terms of trait theories, so again, traits, things that we're made up of in terms of our personality, we have what we call the 5-factor model, or what we want to break down that acronym for OCEAN, okay? Now, it may not be explained in the same way, but it's a good way to remember it, all right? But with OCEAN, okay, what we're looking at here in terms of another trait theory is openness to experience intellect, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and then neuroticism, okay? And those are the 5 factors. Well, when we look at those for our personality, what are we? Are we open to new experiences? Okay? Are we? Are you willing to do something that you've never done before? I'm not jumping out of a plane. Okay, let's just put that out there. All right, I'm not going to put myself out to where I'm going to go skydiving. Okay, Bungee jumping, you're still gonna have to sell me on that one. You're gonna have to either offer me dinner or pay me 1,000, but I don't know, but something. But other things, I'm pretty open to. Okay. Having spiders crawl over me, not so much. Okay, so if you guys remember, what was the Joe Rogan show where Fear Factor, right? Fear Factor, okay? And he used to have people do the craziest things, and like, yeah, some of that stuff it kind of creeps you out, but you're like, I would do that, but then you get yourself in that situation, like, I don't know if I would do that. So, but your personality, are you open to new experiences? Are you conscientious? All right, and with conscientiousness, you're talking about things like, are you aware of things? Are you self-reporting? Are you adaptive to new patterns? Are you basically are these in the advanced exercise stages? Like, where are you? Are you conscious of where you're at? Okay, and then with the personality part of the E, extroversion, introversion. All right, moderate. What are you? Where's your personality in terms of like your moderate to strenuous base? Okay, are you still self-reporting? Again, there's that adaptive exercise pattern. There's those advanced exercise stages, and then with extroversion, introversion, are you in an exercise dependence kind of a state? Okay, and then agreeableness is that true exercise dependence. All right, where neuroticism, on the other hand, is more about exercise adherence. There's a self-reported exercise, the adaptive, the advanced, and then there's again the exercise dependence in that realm as well. But if you notice how on the side of each one there's a plus or a minus, okay? So if we're looking at those pluses and minuses, we really need to be aware of, okay, well, are those positives or negatives, all right? And so, with conscientiousness, if you're self-reporting your exercise, that's a good thing, okay? If you're an extrovert with extroversion, okay, you're probably more likely, exercise intentions, that it's a positive, okay? And then if you go even deeper into that, you go over to the right side of everything, and you're like, oh, neuroticism, cool, but there's like a minus. It's like, well, if your exercise adherence is too much, okay, if your self-reporting of your exercise becomes too much, okay, those are some of the factors that we have to pay attention to. All right. The plus and the minus are really more about the positive and the negative component of everything, and we have to be aware of that. All right. The higher, the pluses are going to be more positive for your personality, where the minuses are going to be, okay, that's just too much into yourself. Okay. So again, with that, with the 5-factor model here, so we look at everything in terms of intensity and preference. Okay. So what we're saying with this is, we'll just go again. We'll go through a predisposition to select a particular exercise intensity when given the opportunity. All right. Your intensity preference. With that, what you're saying is that you're more apt to select a manner to work out in. Depending upon your personality, if you're a little bit less motivated or you are a little less aggressive, you're probably going to be more likely to shy away from the higher intensities that you might have. Okay. On the other hand, if you're a person who's a little bit more aggressive or a little bit more risk taking, you're more likely to go the other way. Okay. Vice versa. Okay. Whereas exercise tolerance, on the other hand, a trait that influences one's ability to continue exercising at an imposed level of intensity even when the activity becomes uncomfortable or pleasant or unpleasant. So what we're saying with that one there is, let's see if we can give two really good examples here. A person who can go beyond that level of intensity even if it becomes uncomfortable. Think about an Ironman athlete. Do you think that after, swimming, what is this? I think it's swimming a 5K. All right, and then biking. Oh boy, I forget what the bike is, but I think it's like 112 miles or something like that. When we talk about everything there, yeah, it's 112 miles. That's what I thought. Okay, yeah, it's a 5K. swim. It's a 112-mile bike, and then it's a marathon, so 26.2 miles with that. Um, so basically, with that, you know, at some point that's got to become uncomfortable. But you're in it to win it, and you're in it to be able to achieve. So you're going to, your intensity and your intensity tolerance is going to be vastly different than the person who is just starting out, who their intensity level is low and their tolerance is low, so everything is just uncomfortable and unpleasant for them. Okay. And that is where, we have those vast differences between the experienced person versus the person who truly, is way ingrained into that. Okay. So what we end up with is, we have some of these. So the 5-factor model is an approach. Now we have someone. It's called the Preddy Q, and this right here is a way that people self-report their tolerance. Okay. And how they figured it out, how they did this was they went by two different things here. They went by the length of time young people spent exercising beyond what we call ventilatory threshold, basically beyond their normal breathing pattern, okay, at a higher level. And the other thing they looked at was self-reporting for the length of time middle-aged sedentary women continued exercise beyond that as well. Okay, and they basically asked these people these questions to be able to get some sort of input that would give them, what they felt like they're, could they continue, could they not continue. um, so those who had a higher tolerance, they were able to go longer. I mean, yeah, it's pretty straightforward. um, it just depended on the person, and how and what they felt like in terms of their mental capacity, what their behaviors were like, and what they were in terms of their level of performance. Okay. So there's some other things that can kind of come into play as we kind of finish up this chapter here. But actually, let me go back to this one here, because this is kind of interesting in terms of just kind of thought process. Like, think about these questions. Have you found that exercise helps you to relax and worry less? That's something to think about. So again, traits and states, that's what this relates to. And another question you can ask yourself or ask others is, what type of exercise program would you develop for someone who is tense and a worrier? It's going to be vastly different than what someone who is not a warrior and someone who is more, easy, free spirited, and easy, more free willed. All right. So we have to be aware of that, because we don't want to stress people out because of exercise. Okay. So last couple things here, when we talk about something called hardiness, or what we would say is dispositional resilience. Um, but basically, when we look at hardiness, there's three main components to it. Okay, but let's talk about the definition. Stress buffering and associated with resilience when an individual encounters stressful events. Stress buffering, you're basically able to kind of like and kind of shove it aside. You're buffering it. It's kind of like, this doesn't even bother me, and you shove it away. All right, and then resilience, being able to bounce back. That's what we're talking about there. It's how you do that. Well, what are the three components? A sense of control over the event. If you go into something and it's challenging, that tolerance intensity, all right, type of environment, or the tolerance, the intensity preference, or the intensity tolerance. Well, yeah, what you're expecting. It's going to be tough, so you can control it. All right, but there obviously are some uncontrollables, but we don't worry about that. All right. Also, with hardiness, that fullness is a commitment, dedication, or involvement in everyday life. Okay. And then lastly, a tendency to perceive life events as challenges and opportunities rather than a stressor. Carpe the diem. Okay. When you think about seize the day, things like that. That's what, you're kind of talking about in this hardiness sense, is like, no matter what life throws at me, I'm going to be able to overcome it. It's not going to stress me out. All I think of it as is, I can do it. And nope, this is a challenge. Okay. And that's how we kind of look at that. Okay. And that's what hardiness is all about. Now, and dispositional resilience, it's just a secondary term that is it's referred to in this state. Okay. So, with hardiness, we're talking about individuals with greater resilience to stressors are less likely to develop mental health disorders. Yeah, pretty straightforward because you're not stressing constantly. Okay, you're not stressing over the things that could stress you out, stressors. Those higher in hardiness are able to transform stressful events to decrease their impact. Yeah, they make that stress into a productive type of environment versus making it a counterproductive environment. All right, and then exercise serves to buffer against the strain of stressful events. People that go to the gym to blow off steam, yeah, that's okay, but you have to do it in a constructive way. It can't just be like going there and throw things around and you're still angry, right? But no, exercise is a way that you counterbalance those stressful events and you make things like easier, okay? So with all this stuff, it's like, well, what's so good about it? All right, what we need to think about here is practical recommendations and what we need to figure out. All right, so if we recommend an exercise program, we have to think about the exercise dose, like medication. Okay, so we need to think about that exercise dose being similar to improve fitness and encourage weight loss. Okay, we need to give them a medication of exercise. Okay. The ACSM has a great program called Exercise is Medicine. It's on that whole premise that exercise in specific doses and achieved can create a better, healthier, well environment within the body. Okay, and that's where ACSM promotes that through their exercises is movement kind of campaign. Okay, with practical recommendations, some sort of aerobic activity. I think it's kind of interesting that with research they found that activities with like aerobic activity influence personality factors. Maybe because it's more longer duration, and then maybe it's a way to clear your head more so than anything else. All right, and then lastly, take into account personality factors shown to influence psychological responses to exercise. You have to know the person. Doesn't matter if you're a personal trainer, a strength and conditioning coach, a phys ed teacher. You need to know your audience. You need to know the people that you are performing for. Now, I say performing because you are. You're on a stage in front of people, and you have to know who they are. And if you don't, it's going to be very difficult for you to control certain things that you can control. It's going to be hard for you to be able to talk to people the way you're supposed to. All right, all of those things present challenges, and then that makes it harder for them to get back to you. Okay, so always remember these things. Give that exercise as a medication. Okay, exercise is movement. Exercise is medication. Okay, give them some aerobic activity, but don't dismiss resistance training, weight training. Okay, and make sure you know your people. That's really what it comes down to. Okay, so again, just be aware of all of this. I know it all sounds kind of like crazy, but there is a lot of meaning behind understanding the personality, dispositions, traits, states. All right, it's really important to know that. It's to understand that they're with a certain type of individual, ecto, meso, endomorph, right? All of them, or ecto, meso, yeah, right, ecto, endo, and mesomorph. The three of them, they have different personalities. Use them. Go with them, but also challenge them. Okay? Understand there's situational factors. Understand that you have three different ways of doing things with your personality factors. Understand you have ways of doing it with the type of responses you have, and then the roles. Okay? All of those are going to make a massive difference when you look at everything. All right? So keep that in mind. We have to be aware of this. All right? So again, chapter 7 is a really cool chapter. Personality is a really major thing for yourself or for others. So take account of it, take note of it, and know what you got to do with it, okay? Because if we don't make it individualized for each person, it's going to be more challenging, okay? So again, chapter 7, cut and dry, right down to it, all right? Personality and exercise. Hope you guys enjoyed the lecture and have a good day.